Welcome to the latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. My name is Paul Thomas, and this evening we are going to be discussing the Civil War. With us tonight, James Hearn, Daniel Thomas, and Merrick Moses. Welcome, panel.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of passion in what happened, but wait till this next question. We'll get your hair up. Okay. Now I have two sons, and whenever I explain to my sons about my belief, which I'm going to espouse here in this next question about the phrase woke, I got chastised because they were afraid I was going to use the N word. So I'm going to avoid using the N word, even though I feel that it's a very much part of the explanation. So here it is. On April 22nd, 2022, Ron DeSantis signed the Stop Woke Act, which contains bunches of provisions penalizing attempts of Florida schools to consider historical truths. The term woke is something I had never heard until a couple years ago, and I just now learned that its genesis came from Black culture in the Jim Crow South. It's my understanding that the locals would warn their friends and acquaintances when traveling through an area where they could easily become victims of white violence, like what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. They'd say, "Stay woke, man," which basically means keep alert. Watch out for Whitey. He can be dangerous. When I heard that explained by a Black man from the Deep South, I wondered how this became such a prevalent talking point for white nationalists. So I formed this theory on which I would like to hear your opinion. Before the Civil Rights era, it was common to refer to African Americans as the N word, because that slang was derived from Negro and because it was demeaning and derogatory. With the advent of a successful movement which fought against racial degradation, it was no longer acceptable for any politician to speak of that group as such. The term Black became the next mantra, but that didn't work well for white supremacists because it wasn't demeaning enough. No way could they use the term African American because that sounded downright respectable. And the white supremacists can never be expected to use language that is respectable to people from that group. Welfare Queens was tried, but not nearly effective enough. Now, these poor racist politicians were really in a bind. They couldn't use the N word because, while that might appeal to their base, it still remains way too toxic, as my sons pointed out to me, to say out loud. They needed a phrase that could be both demeaning and still be permissible. Along came woke, which fit the bill perfectly. So they call the Stop Woke Act, which is simply code for don't let the N word get their way. That's my theory. So what do you think? Merrick, I'm going to let you go last on this. So, Dan, I'm going to let you go first. What about my theory? They needed something that they couldn't, they had to say something that was politically correct enough, but still had the same meaning about what woke is.
Okay. To somebody on the right, woke means the N word. It
Okay.
also
Okay.
it also
Good.
means the F word. It means the T word. It means every other slang word you have for somebody who is not a straight, white, heterosexual, cisgender male. To people on the left, woke has a very different context. It is basic respect and empathy for the people around you. If I say something here that is said in good faith and in good nature, that is incorrect about an African American, and Merrick corrects me, I accept his correction. and we move on. And it just doesn't become a big thing. That to me is woke behavior. If you say something about a LGBTQIA person and I correct you, it doesn't become a big thing. We just move on. You've learned your lesson. Like when Tyler is on this panel, Tyler is not a he, Tyler is a they. So we refer to Tyler with the they, them pronouns out of respect for what Tyler wants.
Yes.
And that is woke behavior. It's just being empathetic. That's how the people on the left take it. That's how we use it. If we screw up because we are human and we do make mistakes, once we learn that we've made our error, we correct that behavior and we move on.
Okay, I want to say one. Let me interrupt you for a second. That it's rare for me to hear anyone on the left even using that term, but the people on the right use it nonstop.
Yeah, you don't hear us on the left talk about critical race theory either, because they've manufactured a boogeyman. Like on a scale of 1 to drag queen story hour, the woke is the scariest thing that they can think of. They use it as an insult. It is a pejorative. It is a dog whistle to these people. It's very deliberately done that way. They have created a boogeyman, and that's what they're going to use. They don't have policy ideas or solutions to difficult problems. They've manufactured an enemy, and the enemy is people with basic human compassion.
Yes. That makes sense. Okay, Jim, can you recall when you first heard the term woke? How long ago it was? Because it had to be pretty recent, right?
Yeah, pretty recent. I guess my view of it, of the whole thing, comes down to this. You started talking about politically incorrect. What's the definition of politically incorrect? The definition of politically incorrect, as far as I am concerned, is that which causes a negative change in votes. It's a political term, always has been. If politicians can't use politically incorrect words, because the net effect would be that they would lose votes. That take that as a definition or not. But here's a little story that I just saw the other day. As a matter of fact, I saw it repeated this morning. There is a woman who has written this long book about how we have to defeat wokeism. And she was being interviewed
I've seen the clip. It's beautiful.
She was being interviewed by, I think it was an interviewer from CNN, who was just waiting for her. Just, you could tell she had it in her eyes. And this lady started talking about what the book meant. And the interviewer finally said, look, just so we're on the same page, what's your definition of woke? And the person who wrote this very long book, who sells these books, couldn't do it. She hemmed and hawed and said, well, here comes a classic soundbite for television. She said, we spent an entire chapter discussing what wokeism is. And then beyond that, she basically said, I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. So the idea that it has meaning to that, everybody that's to one side of the middle is nothing more than an excuse. When I read this question, I have written an answer 10 times. And the last time I did it was last night. I'd like to go through on a positive note, what I think about wokeism or woke. My definition of woke, by the way, when it comes back up here. A definition that works for me, and I'm into working definitions. The definition of woke is alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. Now, they've subsequently added gender to that sentence. So it reads alert to racial prejudice and gender discrimination. I think that's a good working definition of woke. As old as
Okay.
I am, where I came from and who I knew back in the early 70s, I wish we had this term. I really do. I think it's a very powerful word when used in the proper context that hopefully will be so powerful that the other side who doesn't even know what it is will eventually have to listen. Let me give you examples of people from my lifetime that weren't called woke, but certainly were. Number one, of course, is Martin Luther King. The second one that I would recognize as being woke was Stokely Carmichael. Now that's my era. That's the 70s. He was wrong, but he was woke. That's the way I look at it as far as what he accomplished up to a particular point. I'm going to add a third person in here, and just as a way of suggesting something here, and that's a lady named Barbara Fields. Barbara Fields is an American history professor at Columbia University. She was the counterpoint to Shelby Foote in Ken Burns' The Civil War, which I think is a brilliant depiction of the way the Civil War was. She wrote a book, and I just wanted to mention this because I think if you haven't read this, you ought to take a look at it. The name of the book is called Racecraft. I'll just leave it with that. I go from there. I'm skipping a couple people. I don't want to talk about Frederick Douglass.
We can't go on forever, buddy.
Yeah,
Let me go to Merrick here, and I'm gonna let you wrap this up. Merrick, you read my view
Yes.
about it, and I want you to finish up here with this question.
Well, as a member of the hip hop generation, we term it in the terms of knowledge of self. So when you have knowledge of self, you know who you are internally and externally. You're aware of your history and your culture and the facts about the culture that you're in and where you are and where you stand in that culture. Being aware of what's around you societal wise, understanding not just the injustice of the society, but the justice that is due to yourself and to your people. That is what being woke is in terms of context in hip hop. We used to say knowledge of self back in the 80s. So if someone is anti-woke, they are anti-consciousness, they are anti-awakening, and they are anti-awareness. So what I'm seeing is the reason why the right is using this tool is because they are gutting education. They don't want people to be woke. They don't want people to be aware. So they will dumb things down and make, like for instance, Kanye, he says he doesn't read books because it's like eating Brussels sprouts. To me, that's anti-woke, and it's playing into the right's propensity for literally trying to gut education, creating a body of uneducated people. Remember now, Mr. Orange loves the uneducated so that they can be controlled. That's what this is about. This is about control. Too many people are waking up to the history of not only their own community, but in terms of how America is, laws, and the institutions that make up this country, and they want to change it because they actually want to live as human beings and not as subjects to a oligarchy class that is determined to extract as much work out of people as possible and give them nothing. So that is what woke is. Woke is being aware of who you are and who you are in the world.
Okay. I was recently at a dinner with some folks who belong to the same book club. One of them started talking about a book on the daughters of Robert E. Lee, and she spoke glowingly about what a loving father Lee was to his daughters and how this positively shaped their lives. Being the in-house agitator, I asked how they dealt with their slaves. The response I got that night was, they were not called slaves. The daughters called them servants, as if this genteel designation made it all just fine. Although this really rubbed me the wrong way, I managed to stay with polite society and I shut my trap. But it reminded me of the scene in Gone with the Wind where a number of slaves were walking down the road with garden tools. They stopped to tell Miss Scarlett that they were on their way to show them Yankees what for. It also reminded me of a phrase I recently read in the Nation magazine: bleeding hearts, blind spots, where liberals believe they aren't really prejudiced, but manage to find ways to excuse attitudes of their white privileged class superiority as enlightened. Am I overreacting, or is this another issue that liberals finally need to address? Dan, you seem to have this particular issue front and center in your consciousness. So, do liberals need to take on more of what you think about your understanding and your awareness about what white privilege has done for you, or am I just overreacting?
Well, the whole world would be better off if everybody would just do what I think. However, that's that's probably not on the table. Yes, we all need to be conscious of where we came from and how what has benefited us maybe was not earned. Um, there there is nothing more, and my position on this has evolved over time. There was a period in my adult life when I worked a terrible job. I was always very poor. I never had money. I had to make choices like between, do I pay the whole gas bill or do I pay a partial gas bill and get groceries? And I couldn't qualify for any kind of assistance because my job made too much. And that thankfully, that period did not last very long. I got out of it. It was a temporary setback, but I had a lot of advantages, and that is what allowed that situation to be temporary for me. At the time, I couldn't see all of those advantages. I was too immature. I was bitter about the circumstances. It took time for me to think my way out of it. And then once I got out of it, I was able to look back and think I was provided with a really good education. That education allowed me to pick up on a lot of skills. And those skills allowed me to change my jobs and improve and get upward mobility that other people didn't necessarily have because they didn't have my kind of privileged background. And it was later that I recognized how that background came at the expense of other individuals that might have been hurt by it. Like, I had food in my stomach as a child because there was a job for my mother in the financial industry and there was a dad job for my father in a state penitentiary. Not as like working at the penitentiary, not incarcerated. So that made the that gave me a privilege and an advantage. I was not hungry. I had a loving family. I had advantages that other people didn't have, and that money came from somewhere. Um, if we had any doubts about the financial industry being just pure evil, those were settled in 2008. We know exactly what the financial industry is, but there's a lot of good people who work in it, just like there are a lot of good people who are on police forces, do work in prisons. That doesn't mean I don't think we need to burn those institutions down and start again, but I do think that, yeah, that we all need to be cognizant of where it came from. You can't you can't ignore that your iPhone was made in a sweatshop. Like you just can't. Like, you have to be aware of where these things are coming from. You have to understand that child labor built the things you need. You have to be aware that driving your car is contributing to climate change. Like, it's all very intersectional. If you're not aware of what your footprint is and what issues you are causing and benefiting from, then you are a big part of the problem. And I'm not even going to pretend that I understand every place that I fit in that web. but I think I do understand quite a bit. But you could fill an encyclopedia with what I don't know. So yeah, like we all have to be more cognizant. I always want to learn, and then I want to modify behavior. I eat less beef because beef is bad for the environment. I still eat some of it. I still eat it sometimes, but not nearly as much as I used to because I'm aware that there is a environmental cost to it.
Merrick,
And
the mindset that I tried to portray in this question has to be something that you encounter with white people who just feel, oh, I'm not racist. I'm liberal. I embrace, black people as equals and all that. But do you see what I'm talking about? And do you encountering that attitude, um, bleeding hearts, blind spots? Do you see it ever, and how do you deal with it whenever you encounter it?
It's very interesting. So I really first encountered it when I was doing marriage equality work in 2000, 2004 and beyond, 2004 to 2012. And people would say something like, oh, this is just like Martin Luther King's movement. And the name that I had at the time, people did not expect a black person to have that name. So sometimes when I would come into rooms, they'd be like, is such and such here? And I'd be like, here I am. Oh, really? That's your name? Like, what did you think my name was going to be Chewbacca? Like, what's going on? And so it's just this weird passive aggressiveness and this awkwardness. I honestly try to give people grace. But I think that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X was correct in their assessment of the danger of the moderate white liberal, because remember now in Dr. King's time, they were, he was saying that a lot of the white liberal elite was telling him, just wait, you're going too fast. You're going too fast. Just wait, just wait, just wait. And he's like, well, I'm waiting to do what? Like, we need stuff now. And so it's unfortunate because I think that, if we go back to the Civil War, the planters were making money from the Northerners. Like, they were in cahoots together. So those attitudes still continue because the wealthy liberal elite, white elite, and I'm also talking about those in democratic circles too, they haven't learned their lessons yet. But they will when people stop voting for them. That's when they're going to learn their lesson.
Yeah, but it would be hard to see. Jim, I was watching the basketball game with a buddy of mine that I grew up with back in the hills of central Pennsylvania the other day. We were watching the NCAA tournament, and every time somebody would come to the foul line, he would make a comment on how dark he was or how light skinned he was, and then after he made it like about the fourth comment, he looked at me and he said, "Well, I'm not really racist." I said, "Yeah, I know. I know. You just noticed. Yeah." So, that just came the other day. So, do you think that there is that kind of element in society where people just don't realize how, I don't want to use the word racist, but the privilege that they experience and are really ignorant of the fact that they have attitudes that have their superiority on display? What do you think about that?
Let me just make one real short comment to begin with. When you asked if you were overreacting, I took that as an insult to Robert E. Lee, particularly. But we don't have 3 hours to argue that. Not that I was a fan of Robert E. Lee, but the point of that is I do wonder, if that book that you mentioned isn't part of the American history course in middle school in Florida.
No idea. No idea. It was something that they read in the book club, and they didn't give me the title. They just talked about his daughters.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
that was a joke, by the way. But anyway,
Right.
To your
We
question,
knew it was a joke because you said books in middle school in Florida.
yeah, exactly, absolutely.
Good point. Good point.
To your point, the only way I can really address that is that I know a lot more being my age and being connected with people of my age, which came from a different paradigm. We used to talk about people that you're talking about way back then. We thought we were overcoming those people. We thought we were educating those people, whether they were white or Latino or Chinese or anything else. There seems to have been a dramatic fall off in the recognition or understanding of the problems as society seems to have divided itself dramatically and continues to divide itself. Now, who's to blame for that? In my opinion, the big divide has all been created by technology, where it doesn't matter anymore to a great number of people of all races. Is that a good thing? Ultimately, it might be, because when the computers start running everything, they don't care what your skin color is. But I suggest for the moment, it's a terrible thing that people are not aware of their surroundings and at least try to be aware of the problems that are causing all the noise. I'll leave it with that.
Two figures have recently emerged in the news in ways that deserve attention and analysis. Herschel Walker is a football legend in Georgia who moved back from Texas at Trump's urging to become the Republican candidate for the Senate seat held by another black man, Raphael Warnock. Byron Donalds, after one term in Congress, was nominated by the Freedom Caucus to replace Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. In some of the numerous nominating speeches, he was touted as representing the diversity of the Republican conference and historical, being the first black man to hold the Speaker's gavel. These speeches took place while Hakeem Jeffries, another black man, got the most votes on the first 14 ballots. While Donalds isn't nearly as dysfunctional as Herschel Walker, don't they both represent the same thing? Republican attempts to showcase black candidates against Democratic black candidates to cynically disguise their real agenda. I look at Tim Scott from South Carolina is the same way. Token. Jim, what do you think about that? Having these black Republican candidates kind of like going against the agenda, the interests of their people.
I don't have a good answer for your question for one simple reason. I'm not as aware of the particular situations that you come up, that you put into your question. And rather than offer an opinion about something that I don't know, I think I would just like to move on with one comment. And that is, after all of what has been going on, I look at the fact that Herschel Walker lost. I look at that as a good thing, despite that particular battle. The battle went to the right person, as far as I can tell. But if you believe the hype, and the hype that was put out at the time, that wasn't supposed to be the case. There are examples of these sorts of small victories. Some cops are being put in jail for killing people. There are other examples that I consider to be positives, albeit minor positives, at least positives. My view of the political scene, as you well know, is that I am apolitical. I don't give a damn about politicians.
Okay, Dan, how do you see it? Black representatives in the Republican Party. Is that just like hypocritical, cynical, or what's your view of that?
Well, I think that there are wealthy people first and black people second. And I feel the same way about George Santos. George Santos is a grifter, but he's a grifter first and a gay second. Um, but yeah, the tokenism it's not new. I mean, I was first made aware. I first noticed tokenism from the Republican side in 2008 when Sarah Palin, to the detriment of the nation, was tapped to be. I don't know. They unleashed the Kraken to go fight Hillary Clinton, and then Hillary didn't win the nomination, but they were stuck with her. I suspect that because Kamala Harris is the vice president, the Republican challenger, who, whatever white old man that, well, DeSantis isn't that old, whatever white man that may be, who challenges Joe Biden will have a woman as his VP pick. And Nikki Haley's in a real good spot because Kamala is a woman of color. So maybe sending another woman of Indian descent to match her as a token is going to work well. Or at least that will be their political calculus. I can't be racist. I'm voting for Nikki Haley's ticket. Kamala didn't do a good job as VP, so I'm going to vote for Nikki Haley because that's just swapping out one for another. I think that is a gamble that the Republican Party is going to bet on. I do think that Herschel Walker was tapped so that he could take black male votes in Georgia away from Raphael Warnock. I don't think anybody cared about his political opinion or his beliefs. They certainly didn't care that he was a domestic abuser. They just picked somebody who they thought would carry good weight with black people in Georgia. And Raphael Warnock
and sports fan.
Brilliant. Yeah. I mean, well, we saw how O.J. Simpson was treated. Like, sports fans do carry a lot of weight.
Yeah.
But yeah, Raphael Warnock is a wonderful man. He never should have been chosen. Herschel Walker is not on the same playing field as Raphael Warnock. Like that was not an even match. And he was tapped for his celebrity, just like Mehmet Oz.
Raphael Warnock won the election, but just barely.
Well, that's because it's all tribal. Nobody wanted Herschel Walker. They were afraid of electing a Democrat.
Right.
Or their votes were suppressed, despite Stacey Abrams' best effort.
Right. Okay, Merrick. Tokenism among the Republicans. Is that a real thing, or is just something I'm just pointing out because I see it? You there, Merrick?
I'm sorry, I was I'm on mute. I actually know some for real black Republicans that are not sellouts and are not tokens. Like yes, they are Republicans, but they actually have a black consciousness. Unfortunately, people like Tim Scott, and I just have to throw this out here. Have y'all noticed that both Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham are unmarried in a southern state that is super uber fundamentalist Christian, and nobody questions that, but whatever. I think.
Oh no, we question. We question. We're not subtle about it either.
If they're dating, oh my God, I can't even do it. I can't even do it. But I digress. I think that that the tokenism is real, and one of the things that I have a problem with is that these people have no problems throwing other black people under the bus. They have no problem siding with people who literally are calculating their demise. Um, I look at a person like Tim Scott. I also look at Clarence Thomas. He really has some internal issues. And I think that it's very sad. I've heard from the ethers, the Washington gossip, that not even his own blood family want to fool with him like that. Like, it's that bad they don't even want to be around you, and it's sad, really. I mean, truthfully, I mean, trying to have some mercy. Um, these are sick people. They're very sick. They're very sick people. They have some type of complex where they don't like themselves. Reminds me of Dave Chappelle's a character, Mr. Bixby, who was a black white supremacist, and he was blind. And he didn't know he was black. So they had him go in when he would be at these Klan rallies. They would have him go in with a sheet. And one day, somebody took the sheet off, and he was black, and the whole crowd gasped. So that's where these people are. Those are them, and it's sad because when it goes down, they're going to be the first ones to get it. Why? Because they're the ones that's closest to the Klan. I mean, if they want to play with that fire, it's going to burn them in the end. It's sad, but can't save everybody on the ship, unfortunately.
Last question. From the end of the military aspect of the rebellion in 1865 through the passage of civil rights legislation 100 years later to the election and re-election of the only president with an African heritage, there was a talking point put forth publicly that we finally have a post-racial nation. However, following Obama, there was Trump. And in the 2022 midterms, the ones we just had, we saw Stacey Abrams, Sherry Beasley, Mandela Barnes, Val Demings, Charles Booker, and Marcus Flowers all lose to white candidates Brian Kemp, Ted Budd, Ron Johnson, Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, respectively. All these successful white candidates, with the exception of Budd, were incumbents running for re-election. Notwithstanding the advantages intrinsically baked into incumbency, do you see any pattern or conclusions derived from the elections I just cited? How far has our consciousness progressed from the end of the Civil War to today in terms of how African Americans are viewed by Americans of European descent? Jim, you're from the state where Ron Johnson beat Mandela Barnes. Now, I heard that a Republican in the election office was bragging about the fact that the voting in Milwaukee, which is a pretty much heavily black population, was depressed by their voting suppression to the extent that there was like a sizable percentage of people in Milwaukee that did not vote in the midterms that voted in the presidential election. And he touted that as a great success. Ron Johnson won. So is it because Mandela Barnes was black, or was it because Ron Johnson was just a superior individual that people of Wisconsin love?
This state is run by Republicans. Ron Johnson is the third wealthiest politician in Washington. Was there voter suppression? Yes, there were all sorts of games being played with voting stations. But in the final analysis, it was not. It was a fairly close race. In the final analysis, what it took, I think, was the votes of the independents to put Johnson back in office. And my own opinion is when Mandela Barnes' group went into negative ads, they ran a great campaign up to a point. But apparently they thought they were losing, or They thought the fix was in and they had nothing to lose. They went totally negative. And I think people, okay, I think people in the middle who actually want to hear positive things or want to hear what the candidates are going to do, and then so we can believe that if they promise that they're going to do it, I think they were turned off. Now, Ron Johnson's ads were negative from the beginning, but he had a captive audience.
I was going to say, you're not saying Mandela lost because you
No.
ran negative ads.
What I am saying, I am saying is, I think it was a matter of intelligent people of both sides who enough may have changed their vote based on not being fulfilled enough with the information that Mandela was trying to put out. I'm not putting it on him. I've met the man a couple of times when I was working. I think he was the right candidate. Yeah, well, Daffy Duck would have been the right candidate as far as I'm concerned. But I think he would have actually done what he said he was going to do. For some reason, the only reason I can come up with is the money that was involved in the campaigns. However you want to put it, voter suppression was a part. The Nazi nature of most of Wisconsin is a part. But he ran a good race, and I think the fact that he didn't lose by a tremendous amount was a very good thing.
Okay, Merrick, you read the names that I just cited. All those people: Val Demings, Mandela Barnes, Cherry Beasley. They were all very, very highly intelligent, articulate, sophisticated, good candidates. They all lost to the white candidates. Marcus Flowers, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Did racism play a role in those races in your mind?
Yes and no. So you've got the gerrymandering that figures into some things, a lot of things. Then you have folks going into the booth. On one end, they saying they're going to vote for Democrat X, and then when they go in there, they're going to vote for the Republicans because they don't really want a black guy or black woman representing them in Congress. And then you have the Democratic Party. I'm looking at some of the state parties. Florida, I heard their state party was a disaster. And the money didn't go where it was supposed to go in terms of the candidates and what the candidates did with the money, particularly around the ad buys. Also, too, I think that we need to take a look at who these people are hiring as consultants. From when they did the autopsy, when the Democrats did the autopsy of the election, what they found out that, well, at least on the progressive side, they found out that a lot of these Democratic operatives that are going in and being consultants with these candidates are running campaign strategies that do not work for the area. So they're bringing kind of like their stock campaign to these districts, which don't need a stock campaign. They need innovative campaigns. And so I think that the party really needs to take a look at how they're running these candidates and who's advising who. Like, for instance, Hillary Clinton's campaign. Now, granted, she's not a black woman, but I will say that they literally misspent millions. And we see it again in 2022 with how those races turned out. They did not do what they needed to do with that. And the party needs to really look at how they're running these candidates. And then also too, you've got a good portion of the corporate Democratic Party, Like they like to play softball with the Republicans. They don't want you to run like a for real attack ad. And those days are over. Like we need some people that are really willing to show some fangs and bite some people, proverbially speaking, if you will.
Viciousness needs to be inserted within the
Listen,
Democratic. Yeah, yeah. All right, Dan. You heard two analyses there. Why do you think all these black candidates lost to these white candidates?
Well, I definitely think that Merrick's analysis is accurate. I also want to add in some of these races, like uh, uh, Marcus Flowers was Marjorie Taylor Greene's opponent. I don't think he lost so much because he was black as because he was a Democrat. That seat is decided in the Republican primary. She had no opponent there, as far as I was aware. So yeah, like that's the Republicans handed her an unlosable district outside of Republican control. So it doesn't matter who is running against her. If they're running as a Democrat, they're going to.
But all these other
Others,
races were state. All these other races were statewide. That was really
yes,
that was the congressional district race I cited.
yes, and a lot of them, I do think racism is a factor, but I do agree that we need to look much more at how money is being spent, who is spending it, what they are spending it on. I mean, Marco Rubio is not even white. Marco Rubio is Latin. He's a Cuban American. So it's not entirely racism there, but he looks whiter than Val Demings.
Yes, he does. Yes.
So maybe that was maybe that is part of his appeal, but he has a large voting bloc amongst Cuban Americans in Florida who are terrified of socialism because they grew up under Castro and have heard horror stories about it their entire lives. So they think that's what socialism means, and that was a dictatorship. That wasn't actual socialism, and nor are the Democrats offering actual socialism. Um, and I say that as a capitalist in the vein of Elizabeth Warren. The Democrats aren't even close to offering socialism, but they do want a lot more oversight, whereas Republicans don't. Um, yeah, I think it's a lot of messaging, and to go back to years ago, this panel on QAnon that you had. Once you believe that the Democrat is eating babies, how do you really come back from that? Like that's the messaging the Republicans have been using for years, and Democratic policy positions are popular, but Democrats themselves are not. And that's an issue that the Democrats need to overcome, and so is the racism. But I've said like about 10 times tonight, the racism is baked right in.
So, what do you think about Merrick's point that the Democrats need to get more vicious in their campaigning?
Um, yes, but the problem with just going with straight attacks is you have to attack based on the record, I think. And when I say this, I mean I backed Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders because whatever the problem was, Bernie had sound bites and Hillary Clinton had concrete policy proposals. I backed Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris over Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden because they had sound bites. And the men had sound bites and the women had concrete policy proposals. The Republicans are not offering a concrete policy proposal, but whatever bullshit they are spewing, it sounds great. It sounds fun. It sounds exciting. But the answer itself is boring. So when you put a Democrat on defense, like, well, here's a 30-page PowerPoint outlining why that's wrong. I think that's no, they're going to lose. But you actually do have to offer something. So the only way to like, I can say that I think Donald Trump is a criminal. I can say I think he's an idiot, but his response is just going to be, no, I'm not. And that doesn't go anywhere. So you have to attack on, here's the merits of what you did during your time, you failed. Here's what you support, it failed. This is why it failed. So be vicious like that. Don't sling mud the way that they do. Sling mud like a smart person.
Yeah. Okay, guys, thanks so much. Merritt, Dan, Jim, I appreciate you coming in. And all you out there in Cyberland, thanks for listening. Until next time, good night.